Now, please join me in welcoming our Interborough Chair, art educator and docent at the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Rachel Kalnicki.
Thank you, Candice. Before I begin, I just wanted to say how happy I am to see all of you here. We had to add more chairs because there were enough seats for everybody, so that's great. So the work of art that we're going to be talking about is called The Veteran in a New Field. And it was done by an American painter called Winslow Homer. And Winslow Homer was born in 1836, and he died in 1910. He studied to become a freelance illustrator, but abandoned the profession for the freedom to be an artist. So as a consequence, he had little formal training. And during the war, he worked as a freelance illustrator for Harper's Magazine. Most of his war illustrations show the daily routine of camp life drawn realistically. There are almost no battle scenes. In 1866, he exhibited Prisoners from the Front in the National Academy and the Exposition Universelle in Paris. It was his most celebrated war painting. Can you show the Prisoners of War, please? It was his most celebrated war painting and established his reputation. His approach to painting was based on observation. So coming back to the painting. Okay. So this is a symbolic painting embodying the tension between grief and hope after the Civil War. It was completed in the summer of 1865, at the end of the American Civil War, when General Robert Lee, the general of the Confederate States, surrendered. 5 days later, President Abraham Lincoln was assassinated. Lincoln had been elected in 1860, opposing slavery, which was the cause of the Southern states to secede from the United States and forming the Confederacy. The conflict between the North and the South lasted for 5 years in intense combat. Now, I never assumed that anybody knows anything, so I'm going to give you a little bit of a background information on the American Civil War. On January 1st, 1863, President Lincoln issued the Emancipation Proclamation, and because of that, the abolition of slavery became a Union war goal. That led General Robert Lee from the Confederacy to an incursion north against General Ulysses Grant to lead the Union Army. That incursion ultimately failed at the Battle of Gettysburg. On April 9, 1865, General Lee surrendered to General Grant following the Battle of Appomattox, setting in motion the end of the war. Lincoln lived to see this victory, but was shot on April 14th, dying the next day. So the painting is a stark horizontal composition with a restricted and yet rich palette that adds to the intensity of the image. The scene is composed of only 3 elements: the blue sky, a wheat field that takes 2/3 of the canvas, and a lone figure with his back to us. And the colors are the colors of nature. The blue of the sky symbolizes optimism. We can feel the warmth of the strong sunlight and the tranquility and silence of the scene. The wheat represents the bountiful northern harvest, with stalks so tall, almost taller than the man. It symbolizes the return to productive, peaceful pursuits after the devastation of the American Civil War. It signifies renewal and recovery. The low man stands in the middle of the wheat field. The figure is carefully outlined but painted from the back, making it anonymous and universal, which enhances the reunion of man and nature. The white shirt of the man is very luminous. He has discarded his army jacket and his canteen in the right lower corner of the canvas. So slowly, Homer reveals to the viewer the identity of the anonymous man. Can you show the detail, please? So the canteen identifies him as a northerner. It has a red clover leaf, which is the insignia of the 1st Division, of the 2nd Corps, of the 61st New York Volunteers, which Homer had joined on his trips to the front. Can you show the insignia, please? Okay, so this is the insignia of the red clover leaf. The insignia was one of his favorite motifs, maybe because it was personal, but also because it was a spot of vivid color. Can you show the prisoners on the front? Now, this painting was done in 1866 in his studio. The artist summarized the confrontation of the two armies against a ruined southern landscape. There's also an implication about class differences between the elegant officer on his sharp uniform and the disheveled Confederate troops. But what caught my attention was the red clover leaf on the head of the soldier who brought the prisoners to the elegant officer, as well as the flag on the right edge of the painting, and that's with the flag with the red clover leaf. So it shows the defeated Southerners. Okay, let's go back to So the identity of the man is revealed as a Union veteran and a farmer, a simple subject, but with heroic life. This is a realistic scene, and it shows the man in the middle of an action. The veteran holds a single-bladed scythe, which evokes the Grim Reaper. Can you show the Green Reaper? So this is the Green Reaper. And show my next one. I found the Grim Reaper in my building on Halloween also. Didn't know that he came to visit me. In some mythologies, the Grim Reaper is depicted as a skeleton wearing a robe and wielding a scythe. He causes the death of the victim by coming to collect that person's soul. Okay, so we can go back to the painting. Some pigment that has become transparent over time reveals that Homer originally painted a more elaborate scythe that he later simplified. The horizontality of the landscape parallels the movement of the scythe in the hands of the soldier. In the middle of the silence, just the sound of the scythe slicing the tall wheat can be heard. Homer had an approach to painting through observation and direct study of nature and an interest on the effect of life on form. It is this luminosity that shows the movement of the wheat falling immediately after the farmer slices it with a scythe. And we see the luminosity of the wheat, the fallen wheat at the bottom. Homer was almost a self-taught artist and was 29 years old when he painted the veteran in a new field in the summer of 1865. And it is amazing to see how he uses color to demonstrate this movement. At the end of the war, much of the South infrastructure was destroyed. Confederacy collapsed, slavery was abolished, and 4 million enslaved Black people were freed. The war-torn nation entered the Reconstruction era in an attempt to rebuild the country, bring the former Confederate states back into the United States, and grant civil rights to the freed slaves. Homer locates the painting in time and compares the bountiful northern harvest, which signifies renewal and recovery, and the single-bladed scythe, which recalls the war's harvest of death and expressing grief at Lincoln's murder. The bountiful wheat could also connote the Union's victory. The new field of the title versus the soldier's old one, the battlefield, conveys a hopefulness, making this a universal work. The painting poses many more questions than it answers. Who is the lone farmer? Is he black or white? The American Civil War was among the first to use industrial warfare. Railroads, the electrical telegraph, steamships, weapons were mass-produced, making it one of the deadliest military conflicts in American history. So why is he using a scythe, which had been outdated in the war? Why is he alone, having to cut the immense quantity of wheat? Where is everyone else? Ultimately, the painting is about the hope for a productive, peaceful era after the devastation of the American Civil War. The juxtaposition of death and life in this composition offers a powerful meditation on America's immense sacrifice and its potential for recovery and regeneration afterwards. An inspiration for a messianic era that calls to mind the passage from Isaiah 2:4. They shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not lift up sword against nation, neither shall they learn war anymore. And now it's my pleasure to introduce Rabbi Menachem Creditor, UJA's Pearl and Ira Meyer Scholar in Residence, our Pearl.
Hi, everybody. How's this? It's good? All right. So, first of all, it's an honor to be a part of this program in particular, Rachel and Candice. Because of you, I get to think about new things, which is lovely. I hope that I would have been thinking about new things anyway, but I don't think I would have been looking at Homer in the way that I am. And it's a gift. It's a real gift. I hope that we all appreciate the deeply cultural, but also very generative way that including this in our own learning and our own lives is a gift. It really fleshes out life. I wanted to say a few things and then look at the sheets. But before we look down, it is fascinating to me, not as an expert on art at all, but just thinking about meaning making, what any of this might have meant in the mind, well, of Winslow Homer. What does the artist intend? We derive meaning, and some of it is even agreed upon by scholars and other artists, but do we know? The fact that the figure's back is to us, and he's facing the light, that says a lot to me. Is that what he's doing? There's a wonderful illustration in a school of philosophy called phenomenology, where the difference between a chair and a human being is if you walk into a room and you see the back of the chair, you might assume you know what the front of the chair looks like. You can make an educated guess. But if you walk into a room and you see the back of someone's head, and you think, oh, they're very happy, and they turn around and they're crying, or if you think they're very sad and it turns around they're smiling, that is what philosophers like Emmanuel Levinas call shock. And that shock, in the extreme, leads to violence. God bless you. So I want to say that again. If we make the wrong assumptions about a human being when we're looking at the back of their head, it can lead to a shock, and that shock, God forbid, could lead to violence. I don't like the unpredictability of the world. I don't like when you don't feel what I think you're feeling. And in the extreme, that's just too much to deal with. After war, all the more so. In addition to which, right, the name of the painting is also a new field, a new wheat field. Well, is it new? It's been planted already. He's not sowing the seeds. He's reaping a harvest. What's new is a very interesting question to me. Again, I don't know the intent of the artist, and I don't know the identity of the figure. We have thoughts, and I've learned from Rachel also what this comes from and what it might mean. But it is interesting to think about the limitations of our understanding, both when it comes to art and when it comes to other human beings. Even when we face them, sometimes we don't really know what's going on. So, please. let me just do what good rabbis do when they hear questions. They say, that's a really good question. And let me introduce first that in the text sheets in front of you, there are a bunch of sources. There are multiple poems by my favorite poet, Yehuda Amichai, an Israeli poet who was born in 1924 in Germany, died in Israel in the year 2000, spent summers in Berkeley, California, where I was lucky enough to be a rabbi for 11 years. And his poetry defined, and in some ways still defines, Israeli identity, Jewish Israeli identity, the irreverence and literacy combined, the humanism, which he called a post-cynical humanism. I like that phrase, I'm going to say it again, a post-cynical humanism. We're really good at the cynicism. But to be truly human, I think we have to transcend that too. His poetry was taught in schools, and his children went to those schools. So his children were tested on his poetry. And there's a story about his son Ron in class. And they were going to be studying the poetry of Yehuda Amichai, also known as Abba. And so he went home and talked about it with his father. And then he filled out the assignment, and when he got the grade, he got a C. Years later, Amichai was giving a lecture to a bunch of educators, and someone was asking him a question and said, you know, around this specific poem, some believe it means this and some believe it means that. What does it mean to you? He said, well, I can tell you what it means, but in a classroom, just answer whatever the teacher says it means. So when we look at his poetry here, and when we look at this painting here, or when we look at anything worthy of the word art, especially a human being who is the greatest work of art, let's remember how little we really know. Let's not make it a test. This is a beautiful poem with which to begin, and it's not exactly on the theme, but we're going to work our way in. It's called Infinite Poem. I have thoughts about it. I don't know if I'm right, but if I'm testing you, you're going to tell me that I'm right? Okay. Inside the brand new museum, there's an old synagogue. Inside the synagogue is me. Inside me is my heart. Inside my heart is a museum. Inside the museum, a synagogue. Inside it, me. Inside me, my heart. Inside my heart, a museum. Like an Escher poem. And among the things, there's a beautiful YouTube of Yehuda Amichai reciting this poem, and where he speeds up and where he slows down, and what he, by intonation, suggests is fascinating. As I look at this figure, as we look at this figure, the little that we know might have us wonder what's inside of him. Especially because Homer emphasizes the presence of death, mortality, spoken gently, but death. What has he left behind, and what follows within him? In Amichai's poem, he says that he's speaking about having grown up in a very traditional world. And so inside my heart is a museum, and inside the museum is a synagogue, and inside the synagogue is me, and inside of that me. And so the portal deeper and deeper leads me into the different facets of who I am. But I'm all of those things, even if some of them I have tried to leave behind. They all follow me. My sister is a chaplain in the U.S. Navy. She teaches at the Naval Academy in Annapolis. And among the things that she has taught me is how difficult it is for people to make re-entry into the world or to come back from deployment. Because we carry, and I have not gone through those things, we carry everything we have been through, and sometimes it's carrying us, and that can be dangerous or troubling. I don't know if you've seen the very famous photos, because photography was a new technology. Not everyone had it, but it was becoming present during the Civil War. which, by the way, my sister who grew up in Richmond, Virginia, did not learn of it as the Civil War. She learned about it as the War of Northern Aggression. So even what history means and who you're looking at, who's able to pursue peace, and let's deal with right and wrong and justice another time. We're just talking about people. So we carry it all. When I read that poem, I was looking around. I always want to bring Amichai into learning. It reminded me of an older poem. You might know it, actually. Some communities sing this on Saturday afternoons on Shabbat. Bilvavi, in my heart. Comes from a book called Sefer HaCharedim, the Book of the Tremblers. Really worth hearing, so I'm just going to sing it quickly, but the words are on the right. Bilvavi mishkan evnef, you know, sing. Lehadar kivodo, uvemishkan mizbeach asim, lekarne hodo, ulener tamid ekach li, edesha keinda, ulekorban akriv lo et nafshi hayechida. Not the same poem, but the English translation here is, in my heart, I will build a tabernacle. Right? Mishkan, a temporary dwelling place for God. That's what that kind of tabernacle is. To beautify God's glory. By the way, why do I need to build a tabernacle in my heart? Because the temple's been destroyed. In the aftermath of loss of the temple, I will build one in my own heart. Mystics had said, still do, that from the time of the destruction in 70 CE, the Holy of Holies was relocated to the human heart. And in that Mishkan, in that tabernacle, I will place an altar for the rays of God's glory. Fascinating. So what is the origin point for the rays of glory then? Somehow within. And for the eternal light, I will place the fire of the binding of Isaac. This is not a gentle light. It's not a gentle fire, and it burns in my heart. Loss burns in my heart. Love burns in my heart. And for the sacrifice, I will offer my own soul. Nafshi hayechida, which is the Hebrew language for the command that God gave Abraham to sacrifice Isaac. I carry within me all of that, says the author, at least through this read. Different, but only in degree from Amichai. And perhaps, I don't know, but life wasn't suddenly peaceful. To leave behind the ravages of Gettysburg is captured in those photographs. Loss. Those photographs changed everyone's consciousness for a month about violence. So what I wanted to do in the choice of text that I made was look at, I'm sort of looking at him as if he's talking to me, as if I know what his voice sounds like. I think he's seen too much. I think he wants the scythe to be the original scythe that was really for farming, as opposed to sort of the recognition that tucked into that, even in his cultivation efforts, is the war that he fought with those hands too. I don't know what he's done with those hands. So in the texts that we're going to look at is a yearning for a future, hope for a future. We don't know what it looks like. We don't know with certainty that there will be one. And there's a certain word that I wanted to focus on. So if you look at the bottom of that first page, this is the first verse and then the end of Psalm 130. I'll just do the English. A song of ascent. Mi ma'akim, from the depths I call you, God. Skipping a few verses. I hope in God. That word for hope, by the way, is kiviti, like the word tikva, hope. I hope in God, my whole being hopes. and I await. And you see in parentheses, I wrote hope for / expect. No one knows what that word really means. The Hebrew is hochalti. And we're going to come back to this word a few times. I am more eager for God, this is my sovereign, for God, than watchmen for the morning. Yes, even watchmen for the morning, meaning think about if that's your job and you're waiting the dawn. Now, I want God more than that. I hope more than for the dawn, maybe because the dawn's going to come. I'm not so sure about God. O Israel, hope / wait / expect something in God, for with God is steadfast love, and that simply means, and it's not simple at all, that there will be love in this world. Whatever you think about God, believe or not, one of my teachers said it really well, that Judaism affirms the belief in a maximum of one God. That's a joke, by the way. Belief in a maximum of one God. Now you're allowed to laugh, I said it again. So whatever you believe about God, a world that has what some call God can be a loving one, can be, should be. It is this one who will redeem Israel from all their iniquities, because we won't get it right. It's not that God will show up and love will appear because we got it right. It's maybe things will be okay. And I know that this is ArtMatters. And I know that we're talking about after war. But I don't really think we're talking about after war. So let's be gentle on ourselves, as we say, and not deal with the geopolitics. Again, focusing on the human experience and praying for a moment that maybe will look like that. Because of all the losses in the south of Israel, agriculture was targeted. Irrigation was targeted. Fields untended, thank God, have thousands of volunteers, including some of us who have gone over the last year to go pick grapes as if we know what we're doing. So there are moments in tradition that touch all of this. And I'm going to point to a Talmud text, not spend so much time with it, just tell you what's in it. On the second page, where at the very top it says Talmud Bavli, Brachot 32a, this word Yachel Hochalti, I expect, I hope, I yearn, no one knows what it means, and the Talmud has a very long discussion about what the word means, and they don't agree. The examples are very wide-ranging, and not all of it is actually the etymology of the word, but they find verses that have the letters in common. And what I want to suggest as I read through this fairly quickly is that the rabbis are reflecting on what they can grasp onto when it comes to hope. And each one of them, it's very different. I'm asking you, don't lose yourself in the intricacies of the argument. Think about the emotionality of what they're trying to say. Moses, vayichal, he beseeched God. What does that mean? Rabbi Elazar said it teaches that Moses stood in prayer before the Holy Blessed One until it made him ill. Hechalelu. It sounds like the word vayichal, to hope, to wait, to expect. What does it mean? He was hoping so hard it hurt. Right. Rava, another opinion, middle of the first paragraph, said Moses stood in prayer until he nullified God's vow. Let me just say that again. If you believe in God traditionally, this is radical. If you don't believe in God, or if you believe in God radically, this is very strange. Moses nullified God's vow. It's written Vayichal here and there, referring to vows, because regarding vows, the master said, one who vowed cannot nullify his own vow. You get into a routine when you commit to it. It takes someone to shock you out of it. So Moses, through this word, hope, wait, expect, dream about a future that is different than the trajectory I feel I'm on, he stood there until it broke God's promise down. That's amazing. Bottom left. Shmuel said, so now we're going to get a third opinion, these are not going to be solved, and if all you hear is tension, that's fine. Shmuel said, the term Vayichal teaches that Moses gave his life from the word chalal, which is actually how we describe a body that doesn't have life anymore. As it is said, and if not, erase me, please, from your book. Do you know the context for this one? We just talked about it in the other room, some of us did. After the golden calf, God says to Moses, get out of my way, I'm going to destroy them and start again with you. And Moses makes God take the promise back, says, shame on you if you do this, and if you do this, take me out of your book. So not only was he willing to stand there and wait and hope against God, he was willing to stand there and give up his own life for the sake of his people. Top right. Rava said, that Rav Yitzchak said, the term Vayichal, again our term, hope, wait, expect, teaches that Moses caused the divine attribute of mercy to take effect upon them. He activated a different part of God. Next, the rabbi said it teaches that Moses said before the Holy Blessed One, Master of the universe, it is a sacrilege for you to do something like this. Chalila. Modern Hebrew, shame on you, God. Sometimes hoping in the future is even calling God to account, I guess. This Yom Kippur felt like that to me anyway. I don't know if you're familiar with this song. It's a piyut, a poem, Ki anu amecha, for we are your people. I was serving as cantor in a community. I screamed it. I've never screamed prayers. Like hurling it at heaven. We're your people, remember? That is a different way of thinking about a future. It's demanding it. It's chutzpah at God. And it might be righteous. Final. It was taught in a Braita, means an old text. Since we're looking at an old text, this is a double old. Rabbi Eliezer the Great said this term teaches that Moses stood in prayer before the Holy Blessed One until he was overcome by achilu, similar to the word vayichal. And I want you to know that the Gemara has no idea what the word means. It quotes a rabbinic text and it's using a word, but it has no idea what it means. So immediately it goes, oh yeah, that means. So look at the next paragraph. Even the sages were unfamiliar with this term. Therefore, the Gemara, the text we're looking at, asks, what's the meaning of achilu? Rabbi Elazar said, achilu is fire in the bones. That's how much Moses dragged the future into the present, burned him on the inside, but he held. Now, to make it a little bit lighter, because I haven't been, there's a story about a town where there's what you call in Hebrew a batlan, someone who has nothing to do. Sometimes we call them millionaires or retirees or, whatever. Someone who needs some help figuring out how to spend their time. We know we have friends like this. We have partners like this sometimes. So there's a batlan, and the town is getting worried because he's getting into trouble or he's just bored and nodding off, and let's give him something to do. So the town decides to hire him to sit in a seat on the east of the town, facing east, so that he will see the Messiah when the Messiah comes and tell everybody that the Messiah is coming. And they're going to pay him a living wage for this. That's his job, to sit during work hours and wait for the Messiah. After one day on the job, he brings his Messiah-waiting badge and hands it back, says, I quit. They said, why do you quit? He says, this is exhausting. What if he could go lasso the Messiah and bring it? Waiting, hoping, expecting, demanding. How do we face the future after such disruptive, unfair, violent, bloody, sad, heavy? Do we just wait for things to get better? The John Mayer song, right? Waiting for the world to change? Waiting on the world to change. No, that's not a Jewish way. In fact, I do an unfair treatment of Buddhism, but one of the central tenets is that attachment is the root of suffering. Judaism says in response, suffer. Attach. What happens next matters. Desired specific outcomes, that's not a bad idea. Dream big. Make it real. So what you have moving forward are three more poems by Amichai. So just look with me. that verse that Rachel recited, which many have associated with this painting from Isaiah, the Hebrew is V'shafat ben hagoyim. You don't have it on this sheet. I'm just reading it to you. V'shafat ben hagoyim ve'ochiach la'amim rabim v'chitetu charvotam le'itim v'chanitotehem lemazmerot lo yisagoy el goy cherev v'lo yilmedu od milchama. Here's a conventional translation. Thus God will judge among the nations and arbitrate for the many peoples. And they shall beat their swords into plowshares and their spears into pruning hooks. Nation shall not take up sword against nation. They shall never again know war. You look at the back of this guy and tell me if you think he thinks that. I'm sure he's, davening, praying. So this is Yehuda Amichai's appendix to the vision of peace. It's his commentary on the verse I just read. Don't stop after beating the swords into plowshares. Don't stop. Go on beating and make musical instruments out of them. Whoever wants to make war again will have to turn them into plowshares first. Look at the scythe. It started as only an agricultural scythe in the hands of Homer. But then he began shifting it back to a weapon or an acknowledgement of death. So put the lines back in. Make it harder to go back to war. I've always noticed, for the last 2 months, since we've been talking about this painting, that his canteen is there and his jacket's there, but what's not there? His gun. Imagine he's talking to his children. He might sound like Yehuda Amichai, who says in Sonnet, the next poem on your left, my father fought their war. Germany, by the way, is what he's talking about. His father in Germany. Fought their war 4 years or so. He has a separate poem that says, thank God my father and I are not alive at the same time. We, fighting for our countries, would have fought each other. My father fought their war 4 years or so and did not hate or love his enemies. Already he was forming me, I know, daily out of his tranquilities. Tranquilities so few, which he had gleaned between bombs and smoke for his son's sake, and put into his ragged knapsack with the leftovers of my mother's hardening cake. He gathered with his eyes the nameless dead, the many dead for my sake unforsaken, so that I should not die like them in dread, but love them, seeing them as once he saw. He filled his eyes with them. He was mistaken. Like them, I must go out to meet my war. He just wanted it to be, as the Israeli song says, Hamilchama ha'achrona. He wanted to be the last war. Not the same, but I've been editing my father's sermons. And he writes in 1999, my dream, my deepest aspiration is that my great-grandchildren, 100 years from now, will not live under the shadow with neither insecurity nor paranoia. While crazies, he said, I wouldn't have said that, while crazies will never depart entirely from the world, I pray that my great-grandchildren will no longer feel threatened because they are Jews. Not here, not anywhere. They should walk proudly, uprightly as Jews, wearing a kippah or a Magen David or both. I pray for their eyes to be filled with peace. But like them, we all have to go out and fight our wars. Amichai didn't want that to be the case, but he knows, he has open eyes. He fought in all the wars. And then taught poetry to middle schoolers, and in his part-time was Israel's most celebrated poet. So his poem Wild Peace says a lot, the right side of your page. Not the peace of a ceasefire, not even the vision of the wolf and lamb, but rather, as in the heart when the excitement is over and you can talk only about a great weariness. I know that I know how to kill. That makes me an adult. And my son plays with a toy gun that knows how to open and close its eyes and say, Mama. A peace without the big noise of beating swords into plowshares, without words, without the thud of the heavy rubber stamp. Let it be light, floating like lazy white foam. A little rest for the wounds. Who speaks of healing? And the howl of the orphans is passed from one generation to the next, as in a relay race. The baton never falls. Let it come like wildflowers, suddenly, because the field must have it. Wild peace. What's in his heart? He's looking at the light. He's cutting down wheat. Feed somebody. Wouldn't that be nice? He must be so tired. I have no way to tie this in a ribbon. That's not how life works. And that's not the moment that we're in, even if life one day, please God, should work like that. But when I look at him, I also wonder, Ulai yesh tikva, the middle of the book of Lamentations, middle of Eicha. Please, maybe even in the midst of all that, there's some hope. This is a different kind of peace he describes. It's not actually a peace you can control. It's let it be wild peace. So that it's not based on our decisions anymore. Just let it be peace. Seems like human beings can't choose peace. So fine, let it be wild. Out of our control. Let the field grow. No noise of beating swords into plowshares. I've actually been part, in another life, I was leading a group called Rabbis Against Gun Violence. And one of the most amazing rituals I ever participated in was the melting down of guns made into plowshares. And it was beautiful, and it was righteous, and it was virtue signaling at best. Because it takes so much effort, and it's one gun. We need more than the decisions we can righteously make to actually bring a peace that will last more than the half second that war is over. Dr. Michal Biton will have the last word. If you've learned with her, you know why. In a comment that she wrote just 2 weeks ago on the Times of Israel, a comment on the Torah portion Noach, she reminds us that we often talk about the flood and talk about Noach, but we don't talk about what happens right after the flood, which is not nice. Noach plants a vineyard, and the Torah skips through time, obviously, and says, and instantly got drunk, and his nakedness was exposed, and 2 of his sons reviled him. We don't know what else. But one of his sons covered him up. Name was Shem. The word shame might sound familiar because that's what it is to be a Semite. That's where the word comes from. So we trace our lineage to trying to do better in the aftermath of destruction and in the midst of immodesty. This is what Michal says. Like Shem, we know that life does not move neatly from tragedy to triumph. And so we must find the courage to weather the floods and seek solid ground. We carry on. Not out of certainty about what lies ahead, but because in persisting, we honor those we have lost and forge a path for those who will follow. Until wild peace, this is the best it's going to get. But the Psalms give us a beautiful indication of what could be. There's been a lot of crying. So many places in the world, especially in our hearts and our people and our community. So it's beautiful that there is a psalm that tells us, Hazorim b'dima pirina yiksoru. Those who sow in tears will reap in joy. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Creditor, and Rachel, thank you so much for talking to us about this piece that now, when we look at it, see so much more. And for me, the hope, as seen from Homer's painting, is that next year there will be another harvest to be scythed, and hopefully, as Dr. Bitton says, we will carry on. So we thank you all for coming today, and most important, well, not most important, but please do register for our December 19th event on college anti-Semitism, a very worthwhile, important event for you to attend. And look out for that invitation. And on January 27th, I will be doing the next ArtMatters event, again, loving to do it with Rabbi Creditor. So thank you all for coming.